Hello, everybody. This is Paul Herman, the Prince of Motivation and host of Zaka Presents My Journey. We're creating this vulnerable and positive platform where you can get inspired and motivated from different leaders from our community. Today, our guest is Cesar Alejandro Vega, who is the Assistant District Attorney in Worcester County District Attorney's Office in Central Massachusetts area. Welcome to the show, Cesar.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate the invitation. Glad to be here.
Yes. Now, I just want to say you are the first attorney on the podcast. So it's an honor to actually have you here and obviously expressing and telling us a little bit of your story and obviously giving us a little bit more insight on the legal aspect of the what you've been doing over there in Worcester. Before we, dive in a little bit more into like what you do at your office, if you could give us a little background on like where you're from.
Sure, and I didn't realize I was the first attorney. It's a little bit of pressure for me, but I'll see how I handle it.
You're good.
So my background, let's see, I was born and raised in Lima, Peru, which is country in South America, and I immigrated to the U.S. when I was about 10 years old, and my family and I settled in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is Central Mass, about 45 miles west of Boston. And, since I was 10, we lived in the inner city Worcester and attended public schools and, went from there to different schools, college and law school eventually.
Mm-hmm. How was the transition? Obviously you said you were 10 years old. How was the transition coming in from Peru to, Worcester? I mean, obviously I know the temperature difference was a massive thing, but like, what about the culture?
Culture-wise too, I mean, everything really changed because, in just about every aspect of it. I mean, as small as the academic year is completely different. In Peru, and I'm not sure if it's the same in other South American nations, but in Peru, we go to school from March through December. And of course, here is totally different. And so just coming in, we immigrated, I remember, in February of '93. So I had just finished fourth grade, and then I was had to start up fifth grade about halfway through the school year. Around March. So that in and of itself was something to quickly adapt to. Also, the language barrier was huge. I mean, I know some people do attend schools down in Peru where they, teach you in both English and Spanish. But for me, I didn't know a word of English until I came here and had to quickly learn it. I think within like a year and a half. Luckily for me, I was young enough that I could pick it up quickly. But my older siblings, it took them a little while to do it. My younger sibling, younger brother, also was able to pick it up quickly. But, those are just some of the big culture shocks, not to mention, like you said, the weather. But, just those are the only two things that really come to mind.
Now, when you came from Peru over here, did you feel like there was enough Spanish-speaking students in your classes? Because you said, you had to learn English while you were here. Was there any other programs while you were in school to kind of help you with that?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough that I spoke Spanish, so the Worcester Public Schools did have a bilingual program where they let kids, Spanish-speaking students, enter the program and then, basically do the classes in Spanish and where they taught you some English. But in my experience, I didn't feel like the English instruction was enough that you could just, if you just stay there and put no effort on your own, that you could pick up the language, even if you were as young as 10 or 11 years old. So, it was just very limited, I felt like. But at the same time, there's other kids who are transferring or, immigrating from other countries, non-Spanish speaking, for whom those bilingual programs weren't available. So it was a bit of a challenge. But, again, I was young enough that I was able to pick it up pretty quickly.
Did you ever get discouraged while you were in that transitional period? Obviously, you're in a classroom, you're in a new school first off, right? And majority of the students are speaking English and you don't know how to speak English. The pressure is on. Obviously, coming in from a distant country, you had to get accustomed to the school system, but you know that you had to graduate, right? And obviously the pressure is on you to actually learn English. So did you ever feel like discouraged and you want to give up?
I wouldn't say give up. I guess I did. Honestly, I never really thought about it that deeply, like about when I first immigrated in my first few years here. But now that I think of it, I did feel a little bit out of place just because when you separate like bilingual students and what they called regular students is how we were referred to as. Now that I look back on it, I guess I did feel some kind of way about it, that where I didn't want to just be, with the bilingual students. I wanted to know what being in a regular, so-called regular class was. Were they learning something different than I was? Are they, more advanced or less? I just had no idea because I was, in a way, just limited to one bilingual class. So yeah, I guess a little bit of pressure, trying to see what else is out there. Like, what am I missing out on in a way?
Okay. Yeah, no, I could only imagine that struggle. For some of the listeners right now, just out of curiosity, if you could just kind of give a little bit more understanding and explain where is Peru and what does the culture of Peru mean to you?
Yeah, so Peru is in South America. It on along the Pacific coast, and it borders Chile, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, and the culture is heavy on traditions. For better or worse, traditions are really important to the Peruvian community. The other thing that I've noticed about Peruvian culture is that compared to other nations in Latin America in general, there's a large informal economic sector, which means that there's a lot of people who go out there and work and they're not formally employed. So they pretty much have to hustle, essentially, try to figure out a way to feed their families in the informal sector. I think those two qualities sort of characterize the Peruvian um, people, the community there. They're hardworking, big on tradition, family, values, and so on. So I think those are things that really stayed with me, that stuck with me.
And it kind of transformed you into the individual that you are today. When growing up in Peru, like how did it impact your career trajectory?
So I would say that when I was living in Peru, both my parents, my father and my mother, they were both either going to law school or had just finished law school themselves. And my father actually used to be big on learning. He loved to read, know about the law. Same thing with my mom. My mom used to be home with us a lot. But I think just being around that, those kind of discussions between, both parents that, were educated and spoke about the law and also spoke about current events and how the law applied to current events happening down in Peru. Mind you, at this time, this was early 90s, late 80s. So this was when the political situation in Peru was pretty unstable. There was a lot of domestic terrorism activity happening. So there was a lot to talk about, a lot of stuff related to the law.
Mm, mm. And now, could you shed some light a little bit more on your educational background? I know you talked about, the high school and in school when you first got out here and stuff like that, middle school. Could you tell us a little bit more your college experience, undergrad?
Yeah. So my academic experience here in the States was a little different than a lot of people. I would say that when I was in high school, I didn't really finish high school. I wasn't focused too much in education at the time. I felt like there were many distractions. Unfortunately, I didn't finish when I was a junior in high school, close to being a senior. I was with a girl, and she became pregnant with our first child. And, I felt like instead of finishing high school and going straight to college, I think that I needed to work full time to provide. And so it kind of in a bit derailed whatever plans I might have had for higher education. And then when I finally made it back and then decided to go to college, that was another culture shock because, again, I went to a public high school and going to a private university in Worcester. It was a little bit different because I never felt like I could fully assimilate. My interests were just a little different. From anything, food, music, you name it. I felt like I was just a little, like I didn't quite fit in. So that was another bit of a culture shock, just the different values. But that slowly started to change as I started to learn more about my peers and trying to adapt to that environment. And that helped me when I finally made it to law school, because in law school it's probably even worse in terms of how selective law schools can be, and then the type of students
True.
that they ultimately get into the school. They're high achieving students from wealthy backgrounds generally. Of course, if you go to law school, presumably you can afford to pay all those 3 years. So it was just the whole time I felt like it was just learning opportunities, just learning so much from my peers, from my professors, about myself as I went on.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you obviously have graduated, was this the position that you're at right now? Was that the first position right out of college, or did you have to work your way up to where you are right now currently?
Yeah. So when I finished college, I went straight to law school, and immediately after law school, I graduated in 2009. Now you might remember 2008, 2009, we had this severe economic downturn. And it was especially hard for law school graduates from my school in Boston, because there were no jobs really. So I had to pretty much do a postgraduate internship with a federal judge. And I basically worked full time for free, in exchange for some more experience, at least keeping me busy. And then I did that for about 5 months, and then I started to work as an assistant district attorney prosecuting cases, generally misdemeanors, some felonies in the Worcester area.
Also with drug trafficking, is that correct?
Not at the time. So this was like 12 years ago. I did that, and then I went on to do civil litigation for a few years. I would say close to 4. And then I went on to the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts, where I started specializing in drug trafficking investigations and prosecutions. And more recently, I moved on I went back to the Worcester DA's office, but doing the same thing that I've been doing with the AG's office, basically drug trafficking prosecutions.
Wow. There's definitely, you can definitely see there's a ladder. It's a couple of steps. You can't skip steps in order to get to where you got to get to.
Yeah, definitely.
How long do you think is this process for you? Ever since you started like law school to where you are right now? How many years we're talking about?
Let's see. So I started college in 2002. And then I here and there, a couple classes. I wasn't too serious until about, I want to say 03. And then from 03, I graduated in 06 with my bachelor's. Then I went straight to law school, graduated in 2009. And then in 2010, I started practicing law. So it's been almost 12 years, just about.
Okay. Well, I mean, hey, look, everything takes time if you really want to get involved into it. Like now, obviously it took you 12 years to get to where you are, but like, how'd you get interested in law? Like, was it something in Peru where other family members are involved in the law, or was it something when you came to America, it was something that interests you?
Yeah. I would say I was in when I started getting serious about college back in like '03, and I was reading and taking criminal justice classes. Even though I'd been somewhat familiar with legal education and practicing law from my parents in Peru, it's nothing like what it is in this country. So when I was reading some of these textbooks, I would read Supreme Court decisions, namely in the constitutional law area. And the way the justices wrote opinions really struck me. I can't remember the exact opinion, but I was just drawn to the way they wrote. And the reason I was drawn to the way that these opinions were written is that I was always into reading and writing. And when I was in high school, I remember that I had this passion for writing either poems. And I don't know if Dave has mentioned it before, but in high school, I was actually writing raps. And we used to rap in the cafeteria in school. I had a little rap group and was
Oh
heavy into
man.
hip hop. I used to be a b-boy. I don't think I ever got into graph that seriously or DJing, but I was heavy into writing rhymes. And that writing aspect of it would just really fascinated me. So when I read these opinions, I felt like it was similar, but on the academic side. And then when I saw that, I'm like, listen, if I could make a positive impact as an attorney and do it with, writing skills, and I'd be a happy man. So I want to try this out.
Wow. Rapping,
Yeah,
rapping. And then,
yeah,
and you said b-boying as well too. That's I mean,
yeah,
obviously that they go hand in hand. A little hitting the microphone, rapping,
yep.
MCing, and then going right into the b-boying. So hey, look, it worked out. Do you still hit the dance floor like that every now and then?
I only messing around. Like if I see somebody doing it, I go in and do a little up rock, top rocking and stuff. But nothing too serious. If I'm really feeling it, I'll do a little bit of a floor rock, but nothing crazy. But these were the
Oh.
distractions that I mentioned when I was in high school. Because I was so passionate about this stuff that I went all in. You know.
hmm I mean, you definitely saying the link. You definitely speak the language of the b-boys. So definitely you must have been going in top rock, up rock, stuff like that. You wouldn't really be around it enough and not appreciate it and speak that language. So hey, look,
Yeah.
I mean, you got involved in that, and obviously that probably kept you busy out of the streets as well too. You said growing up in the inner city of Worcester,
Yeah.
so that was probably like a good distraction, so you could focus on your academics and obviously dance as well too. So that I'm
Yeah.
assuming that probably did help you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, I don't think about it, never thought about it like that, but, I guess a blessing in disguise in some way because, yeah, I mean, you're distracted doing that. You don't really have much time for anything else, especially the nonsense.
hmm Now, what are some of the obstacles that you face in previous positions, navigating through the public sector?
In my professional work, I'd say biggest obstacles is just the lack of mentors. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I went to law school, think about it this way: there's 5% of law school students when I was attending Suffolk University Law School. Only 5% were Latino, Hispanic, maybe a little more Black students, but minorities in general, I would say less than 10% of the whole student body. And when and you can only, well, I would guess that it was probably less than that in previous years. So I didn't really think I had many mentors. And I think that was probably one of the problems, I'd say. One of the obstacles, challenges that I think students face, law students or college students, I think.
Do you have, and as you continued on through your career, did you feel like you had to obtain some mentors? Like, who are some of
Yeah,
those mentors or people that you looked up to?
man, I had to. So just through, when people say throw this word around a lot, networking and stuff, and at the time, like when people are telling you this, at least for me, I didn't really know what they meant. I thought it just meant, going out trying to meet people, call people and see. But at the end of it, I've realized, like looking back, that for me, it just happened sort of organically. If I was for example, when I graduated law school and I started working for this for a federal judge, I didn't, I was just trying to work, but it turned out that he turned out to be a mentor for me. He might not realize it, but I felt like he was a mentor because I learned a lot from him. I learned about, the law. I learned about talking to people. I learned about litigation. When I moved on to the DA's office the first time around, early in my career, I met several people, older, more experienced prosecutors that I felt I learned a lot from, and they showed me a lot of trust and confidence when I felt like, I might not have been doing a good job. Maybe I didn't feel like I was getting recognized like some of my peers, but these people showed me a lot of support. And so I consider them mentors. But again, these are not people that I specifically went out looking for, but they just kind of happened to be there, and it's those small gestures when you tell someone, maybe a younger attorney, like, hey, if you take interest in them, I think that means a lot, especially for an up and coming attorney.
True, true. I mean, having a mentor in anything in life, it's something that a lot of the previous guests that have been on the show have all mentioned about themselves being mentored, or even telling the Zaka community to find leadership, find mentorship, find people who are in leadership positions to help guide you, or even give you some advice, to kind of make it through some of the challenges that, we face every single day. So I'm glad that you're, speaking on that as well too, and kind of reiterating that, having a mentor is very essential in the growth process. When something I want to ask you, I've been thinking about is like, can you tell us a little bit more about like some of the some things you had to overcome when it came to like racism and economic hardship, and like maybe like what are some of the important lessons that you learned, even during those periods, that period of time, if anything?
In terms of racism and bias and prejudice, I would say for me, it's been, I guess, initially a little overt, but for the most part, it's been just a little more subtle as I progressed in my career. I think looking back to when I was, when I mentioned this, in high school, and my girlfriend at the time, was pregnant. And I remember being in the hospital. I was like 16 when we were going up for her like prenatal checkups, and I was 17. I just turned 17 when my oldest son was born. And I remember, just getting a certain vibe from like the doctors, who were probably like in their mid 40s, established, well off. And here I am struggling, thinking how am I gonna, be able to support my family. And I just, and they, when my son was born, they were like, oh, congratulations, congratulations. But I felt like there was this, lack of sincerity in those congratulations. And that to me just said, like, what do they see right now? What are they looking at? They're looking at, essentially like a statistic, like I'm this Latino male, 17, teen parent, same with the girl. So that kind of like stayed with me, just that visual. And then as I went on, I kind of, I don't know if it's a chip on my shoulder, or what it could be, but I've always approached, challenges, obstacles with that mentality. Like, I'm not gonna like bother with what they think, you know. Uh, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but I just, as I progressed in my career, I've encountered like subtle aspects of that. It might not be in that way where like, they look at you a certain way. It was more like, I don't think I trust you, or I trust in your abilities to handle,
True.
a complex case. Maybe you should have someone else like stand by or with you to help you out. Things like that. Like it makes me wonder, like, what do you think I am? Like, do you think I'm not capable enough, that I need someone to watch what I'm doing, to approve what I'm doing? It's I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to explain, but it definitely, that part, to me at least, I interpret it to be, you wouldn't be treating, you know, a peer of mine in the same way if they look different from me, you know. Um, and
Mhm.
I always hesitate to throw labels out there, but I do feel, and I'm very aware of when I feel like I'm being treated differently.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, obviously, as immigrants, first generation, you might experience some of that, especially as you climbed up that ladder. In a sense, it was. And I like what you did say. Like you said, that you kind of like blocked it out. Like you didn't say, well, look, like what you're telling or what you're saying or your suspicion or your hunch or your suggestions. I'm not really going to pay attention to it. I know in society, a lot of times we kind of fall victim to that. We kind of listen to what people are saying about us. And then before you know it, it kind of like consumes us. And then it takes you away from what you're actually there to do. And that
Yeah,
was actually to do what you're doing now. If you felt victim to listening to all those people, or when you were in those situations, you probably would just maybe you probably wouldn't be where you are right now. So I think that's something that a lot of the Zaka community could take away from what you just said right there. Is like you got to be able to keep your head down and keep moving, despite
yeah,
how people might perceive you or things they might even say, or make you, or the way they might make you feel, because they don't have to really do a lot. Sometimes it's just like you said, hey, look, I think someone might need to join you on that case. That sounds like a very like neutral kind of thing, but it could be another way of bringing something out that they just don't want to say.
yeah. Like you said, you could be interpreted differently, but I, you know,
But you could read the room. You knew what was going
yeah,
on at that point
yeah.
in time. Yeah. So I totally get you on that. What are some of the qualities that you think are necessary for a person of color in like a leadership role?
I would say in my current role, I'm not in any managerial positions. I have sought them out just to see how I grow as a leader in the traditional sense of the word. But I would think that it would have to be the ability to connect with people and inspire people, especially up and coming individuals in your field. Just be able to look back and trust them. Give them a little bit of confidence, get some feedback. Really engage people, because something I found out is that when I was starting out as an attorney, I wasn't as outgoing. I wasn't as social as some others, but I think part of it was because I didn't feel like I could engage on a different level with older professionals. And I think if more leaders, more managers did that, went put a little extra effort in trying to engage subordinates or just people looking up to them, I think, at least for me, it would go a long way.
hmm Wow. Now, something that I want to kind of talk a little bit more on was, I know you go by a famous Martin Luther King quote. Could you speak a little bit more on that for me?
Yes, it's the quote is, "The law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless." And I remember watching, I forget what I was watching, but I remember the speech and the context of it, what it meant, I think just struck me, because
hmm
it did a couple of things for me. Number one, it kind of put I guess what I thought the law is supposed to be, what my place in the law and the practice of law was, and what the law can accomplish and what it cannot. And, because to me, what that meant is that you can't make someone like you, love you. You're going to have to do that through other means. But what you can do is prevent that person from hurting you physically. And so, obviously, looking back at Martin Luther King and when he was giving these speeches and saying these words, he was dealing with something much more serious. But he was defending the legislative action that he was pursuing because many people were saying, well, I don't think the law is going to do enough. The law isn't going to do enough. We need to, we want to win the hearts and minds, et cetera. And what he
Mm.
essentially was saying is that I can't make the man love me, but I can prevent him from lynching me. And so we can, we can, again, we cannot regulate, morality, I think he said, but what you can do is, slowly change the habits, and you can use the law toward that end.
That was, and I'm glad you kind of, we were talking about Martin Luther King. I know because he was very big on the law, right? And, there were other individuals that were like, nah, we got to do it this way. We got to fight fire with fire. But Martin, he was a very smart individual when it came down to that era right there. He found ways of using the law and not bending the law, but being able to, he knew the law that well, so he could make the moves that he could move, that he could do, and I think that's very important. I think a lot of, especially maybe, first generation, even immigrants, minorities, in a sense, we don't take the time to really study the law as well. Right. And that's why, like, we always feel like we're being mistreated. We feel like we don't know what's going on. So we just automatically say, we might say things out of character based off of us not understanding. And I feel like that's a very important thing that we as minorities need to, step up a little bit more. The same way when we were talking to David Carler on the show, we said that, us as minorities, we need to step up and kind of take more interest in our financing and knowing about how to make our money make money. But then you also should know about the law and about the things that are going on every single day in your own neighborhood. If that was the case, we go through, we're quick to just go through day to day, working these crazy hours that we work in, but not understanding what's really of value in our life. And the law is something that you can't run from. It's everywhere. Right. So
Yeah.
we should definitely take more of an interest into those things. And, through your stories and stuff that you talked about, you today on the podcast. And, I'm hoping that, a lot of the listeners listening right now are just going to, what, I'm going to, probably pick up a book or two, or maybe even listen to a law podcast, just so I can get a little understanding of what's in my community and what's around me. And, because things could work for them in that way. I know that, with you and being, in the legal field for so long, the law, I think one of the things that I really want to know is, why haven't you gone into like a corporate firm? It's something that you've been doing, you said, for like 12 years. Like,
Yeah.
what's so important about doing what you're doing and not being at like a corporate firm?
I think for me, I found what I'm passionate about, that I love, is one, practicing law. Number two, being a prosecutor and prosecuting crimes, investigating crimes. And number three, just staying a part of this community. I've done civil litigation, but for the city of Worcester, so it was still public sector job, but it wasn't criminal. And I just didn't I didn't like it as much as I did criminal prosecution. And I think it's because, in a way, I feel like I'm doing a service, in a way. I'm doing my part, to keep this community safe in some way for, the kid that wants to change, what happens in his or her neighborhood. There's always something that maybe there's a kid out there who's trying to walk from home to school or to the basketball court or wherever the kid might be going to, playground, and there's things that they shouldn't be exposed to along the way. Crime, drugs, violence. And if I can do my part to try and, do a service, I'm happy with that. To me, sometimes it doesn't even feel like work. I do it round the clock. I mean, criminal investigations, especially drug trafficking investigations, involve, 24/7 updates, essentially, because if we're after a target, that target's not sleeping. sometimes. They work different hours. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but that stuff is something that luckily, I enjoy doing. I enjoy the writing part of it. So I'm happy with what I do. I don't think that I'd be as happy as I am doing corporate work. I think defending most of the stuff that they do is, at least my understanding, is defense, white collar defense, and other type of litigation. But and to me, it just wouldn't be as exciting, I guess.
Mm. You gotta love what you do. You gotta love what you do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're not chasing the money, you're not chasing, somebody else's dream. You're like, look, I'm chasing my passion and what I love doing. So I commend you for doing that, because sometimes people could easily be like, look, honestly, this is not working for me. I'm not getting the results that I want, or the financing that I need. So then, people, go into corporate America, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, if you feel like you want to live a different type of lifestyle, you want to impact the community a different way, you got to, take those risks and believe that it's going to work out, and you're going to be able to impact the community that like you're doing right now. As we wind down on our podcast today, I mean, again, I'm thanking you again for so much for sharing all this information. Something I really want to know, and I know the listeners are going to want to know, especially our young adults as well. Like, what advice would you give for a kid looking to, become a lawyer today? Like, what are some of the things you would recommend?
I would recommend reading and writing. I know many people might say it, and I'm probably being biased because, again, my passion is writing, and I have had to read a lot to be able to write. I think I'm pretty good at it, but just coming from that biased perspective, I guess, for writing, I would say that just perfect your reading, and especially writing, because these days we're communicating via text, email. Fewer and fewer people are picking up the phone and talking to each other. Fewer people are also engaging personally, face to face. So I think especially when people want to screenshot your text, I think it's important that you're able to effectively communicate in writing. And I think the better way to do that is by reading. And, that would be my first piece of advice. I think it's helpful, not just in the law, but, if you want to go into whatever other field, I think at some point you're going to have to be an effective, communicator and writer.
That is, that's something you can never run away from, communicating. That's something that, all the individuals that and I go back to everyone I've been interviewing on this podcast, a lot of them, have emphasized the fact of like communicating, knowing how to get your point across, especially when you are looked at sometimes and to be the other or the minority, knowing how to communicate, whether it's verbally or, writing it down. You got to know how to utilize that. So I think that's a very important thing, that some people might even overlook, but again, thank you so much for just being a part of today's podcast. Is there any last things that you wanted to kind of share on your end before we kind of?
No, I just, Paul, thank you for your time and for hosting, and thank you to everyone that contributed to this platform and giving me the opportunity to talk. My hope is that, among your listeners, there's always someone that finds something interesting or helpful in their own pursuit. That's my hope anyway. And I always like to make myself available to people who might want to get in touch. So if that ever happens, feel free to share my contact information for anyone who has a genuine interest in getting in touch with me.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that's very important. That just goes again to show the leadership that you do possess, and also the level of mentorship you possess as well too, and helping out the community. So listeners, if you want to hear about more stories like Cesar, check us out on ZakaConnect.com or follow our feed Zaka, wherever you listen to your podcast. Again, Cesar, thank you again so much for joining us. Look forward to talking to you in later shows.
Thank you so much.